Hello, everyone. This is Sirisha, and I host the Women, Career, and Life podcast. Just like you, I've traversed varied paths, stumbled a little, picked myself up, and learned a great deal on my journey. Many of us face similar questions, but we don't always get to have a conversation with our friends or peers. In this podcast, you will hear real stories that you can connect with on the challenges of navigating career and life. You must be wondering who I am. In my everyday life, I'm a career woman, a mom, and an avid reader. I'm also a road tripper, amateur gardener, and even a fashionista on some days. Join me and my guests as we have an open and honest discussion on career change, trade-offs, and working across boundaries. You get the idea. It's a perspective you simply may not hear anywhere else. I'm really excited to have today's guest, Lydia Fenet. She's a global ambassador at Christie's Auctioneer Par None, and she's the global director of strategic partnerships. I came across Lydia when someone recommended her book, The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You, at a Wall Street Journal conference that I attended. It's a book that I encourage everyone to pick up. She's a master storyteller who tells her story and passes on her message with humor, with emotion, with thought, and also a little bit of cheekiness. So please welcome Lydia, and let's dive right into and hear her career, her pathway, and what she has suggestions on how we can be the most powerful women in the room.
I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you so much. To get started, can you talk about what got you to where you are today, what you do at Christie's, and what you enjoy about your role?
Absolutely. I started at Christie's as an intern in college, and it's been a long career. I've been with the company for the past 22 years, and most recently in January, stepped away from my full-time role and am only an ambassador to the company now, which means that I continue to take nonprofit auctions on behalf of the companies, but I no longer have a full-time role, which has been an incredible moment because I have been with the company for so long. So it felt like a natural evolution because all of these other things that you mentioned, for instance, my book, I finished a second book, and a lot of the speaking that I do has almost usurped the role that I had at Christie's. So it's been an adjustment for me to move past a corporate role into something that's much more entrepreneurial, but it's well suited to my love of speaking and my love of being out there and taking auctions and frankly, just creating new businesses.
That's amazing. I'm excited to see where your career trajectory takes you and look forward to more engagement and seeing you on those platforms. You talk about gavel strike, especially as an auctioneer. I think you describe where you come in, you're not selling art, you're selling experience. It's
Right.
a different sector. So how do you use the gavel strike to own the room, to own the stage and get engagement from the people?
When I was thinking about how to write The Most Powerful Woman in the Room Is You, I felt like I needed to start with a story because I grew up in the South and we're big storytellers. And I was really trying to bring the reader and in many cases the audience into this incredible world of charity auctioneering. And I think the easiest way to describe it is those moments backstage where I'm standing behind a curtain looking out, in many cases, and thousands of people in a dark ballroom who are watching a video about the impact of that nonprofit. And as you can imagine, the adrenaline is flooding through and I'm feeling so nervous and I'm clicking a pen and flipping my hair and all the things you start doing when there's a hard stop coming and you can feel the adrenaline just on every part of your body. And I realized that one thing that had always centered me and calmed me when I walked out on stage was having my gavel. It was like my feather as Dumbo. And I walk out on stage and I put my notes out on the podium and I pick up the gavel and I slam it down as hard as I can 3 times. And it's something that I've done I don't even know where it started. Perhaps it started when I first became an auctioneer, but I needed to quiet the crowd. I wanted them to pay attention and understand that the mood was about to shift, but it also helped me channel all that nervous energy. And when I was writing the book, what I realized was this has really become something that I do in many facets of my life. If I have a difficult conversation or if there's something I'm really nervous about, I have to almost create an internal strike method when I can't use my gavel to bring me from a place where I'm feeling fearful to a place where I'm feeling confident. And the strike method for me is really what I encourage other people to think about. If you have that moment where you're giving a big presentation or you're walking into a moment or a meeting or a conversation that you know is going to make you feel off center, off kilter, don't go in there feeling like that as if you don't have an outlet for it. Come up with your own strike method, whether it be a mantra, whether it be something physical. I have one coaching client who I work with who has this red stone that she says she feels, she brings with her, and she's always grasping it before she goes in for a big presentation because it just makes her feel strong. The rock makes her feel centered and strong. And so I encourage everybody not necessarily to get a gavel and walk into a meeting and pound it on a table, but find something that makes you feel strong and confident and use it every single time you walk into a meeting or into a presentation or into a difficult conversation. And then after that, I always say the other key to it is not to just have the strike method lined up, but to know what's coming next. Do the preparation. What is the next sentence coming out of your mouth? I like to say when I go on stage, the first thing that I say every single time is, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lydia Fenet. I'm here from Christie's Auction House," and I'll throw in a joke. And that first line for me is the opportunity to look around at the audience and see who's there. It's a moment for me to not be thinking about what's coming out of my mouth. There are no nerves because I know what's coming next. So if you are a nervous public speaker or you're going into a moment where you feel like you're not going to feel confident, memorize that line and frankly, the next couple as well. So it's almost like an auto reply. It comes out so naturally that you don't worry about anything, because I do think that's going to make you feel like you're lined up for success and not the person who starts speaking and loses their words and starts turning red, which we've all seen in a meeting, which is uncomfortable for everyone, not just the person who is feeling uncomfortable.
This part of the gavel strike is the entry, but really also holding the stage, continuing to hold it, because that fear takes over when you present, and practice is key. I think what you're saying is those first few words trip over in your head, and now you've made an emotional connection with the audience, and then it makes it much more simpler to talk to people.
Yes.
On sitting down there, and then it makes you connect with them. So I like that because it is very hard, and I work in the tech world. So storytelling does not come naturally in certain settings. It's not something you think about. So having a story to tell when you come in, even with data, make it much more engaging for people to want to pay attention.
Absolutely. A lot of people say, and I've been talking a lot about this on Instagram recently, about people say to me so often, "Oh, you're such a natural on stage." And it always makes me laugh. And I think about the first probably 500 auctions that I suffered through, and the poor audience had to suffer through as well, because I was really just pretending to be what I had seen in this role, which is what I thought that charity auctions, which are, as you said at the beginning, very different from art auctions where people show up to buy art. At charity auctions, most people are just at a gala that they're attending, in many cases just on behalf of their friends, have no idea that there's an auction. And even if they do know there's an auction, they don't even know what I'm selling till I get on stage. So I often say to people, my job is really not about selling anything. It's about selling a story. And once I realized that on stage, it wasn't the way that I had learned to take art auctions, certainly. It was something that I really created because I realized that's what the audience responded to. And I do tons of public speaking. I speak I'm represented by CAA. I do corporate speaking. And in each of those speeches, because I love being on stage, because I've spent so much time up there and very comfortable, I do tell a lot of stories, and I do make it fun and lively, even though sometimes what I'm talking about isn't fun or lively, because an audience, even if they're listening to you talk about data points, still loves to understand how that looks in the context of a story. And so I just encourage people, draw from your past, bring something that's human to a story whenever you're presenting, because that's what makes people want to hear more and frankly want to know you more. And in sales, there's nothing more important.
When you're telling the story of the data, don't forget to tell some of the sort of trials and tribulations of going through the experience, because not everything comes out pristinely clean at the end.
Ever.
And walking through that path, I think, helps connect people to see, and I think also shows a bit of your personality, what you had to overcome, what you did to get where you are.
Absolutely.
It's a place to build a personal brand. That's exactly, I'm sure that's what you do a lot constantly, whether it's intentional or unintentional. So every time you get on a stage, a meeting, wherever you are building that personal brand, and how to be intentional about building it.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times in my auctioneering, something will slip out. I'll say something, as I did at the beginning of this, I'm Southern. It has something to do with me, but nothing to do with the auction. And interestingly, that's what people will remember more. I'll get off stage in front of 700 people, and as I'm walking to the exit door, there will be 12 people who stop me and say, "Oh, I'm from the South. Where are you from?" And then all of a sudden it's like, "Oh, I know this person. They know you too." It's a funny small world when you start allowing parts of yourself that people wouldn't expect to know about to be out there, and to be okay with that.
Very true. I think that's all we remember. It's the stories, nothing else in the end of it.
Yeah.
So Switching a little bit, you talked about 10 years doing about 500 auctions before you figured out how to storytell. You also talk about how you had to negotiate and advocate for yourself. In the beginning, there was the glamour of the job and what you got to do, which you really enjoyed. But when you were starting to look at your financial outlook and your financial picture, you realized you had to take some very intentional moves, and change your strategy. And so how did you practice for this conversation with your upper management, and what emotions did you go through when you were getting ready for this? Don't forget to subscribe to my Substack newsletter. The links are in the show notes. If you're looking to partner with me for keynote speaking on women leadership, financial independence, or graduate school and beyond, check out my website and reach out to me. Stay tuned in and listen to the rest of the podcast. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, I talk a lot in the book about this particular story about being 10 years into my career and having a series of conversations that made me realize that I was getting paid a third of what I should have been paid on the open market. And there were so many levels of emotion. I was upset with myself for not investigating that more 10 years into a career and kind of expecting that the company that I had worked for at that point for a decade really thought of me in the way that I thought of them as a family member. I had invested so many hours working, and I'm sure people listening to this who have done this and put in their time in a company know this feeling where you feel like you have personally built something and you expect that they're looking back at you thinking, God, she is doing such a great job. Let's give her 5 times what she did. Yet nobody ever thinks that, just FYI. I don't care how much your company loves you. They want you to walk in the door for the least amount of money that they can possibly give you, period, end of sentence. I wish it was a different story. It's not. I'm not jaded. This is business. So I will say to you that the greatest thing that I learned through this process of finding out that I wasn't making what I was supposed to be making, asking around and finding out what I was supposed to be making, and then having a series of conversations with different people that led me to a place where I felt confident that whatever I was asking for was going to be market rate, was illuminating and very empowering. The way that the conversation came out really is something that I would hope that nobody ever has to get to in their career, because I don't think it's the way it should happen. If you're a good boss or you're an employee who is really invested in ensuring that your boss knows what you want, you're going to have these conversations with your boss before you have a moment where you walk in and tell them it's great to walk in with a resignation slip, but how much better to have someone who's openly advocating you, who knows what you want, who understands that you're going to be asking for more every year and is realistic about what that looks like. That's a much better way to be. In my case, I had a great relationship with my boss and adored my boss, but my boss often told me that I worked for the glamour of the job. Like, those were words that actually came out of his mouth. And also that I was lucky to have my job. And everyone is lucky to have a job, but at the same time, if you're doing the work, they're lucky to have you as well. So you can't just say to the people, oh, I'm so lucky to have a job. It's a two-way street. And I was doing a really good job and I was working incredibly hard and making very little money for it. And so I basically went into his office, and I don't think I meant to tell him that I was quitting that day, because I certainly did not have another job lined up. I had one conversation with another company about potentially working there, but there was no job offer on the table. I'll put it that way. And I said to him, so I'm going to go work somewhere else and I'm leaving in 2 weeks. We were coming up against the busiest season, the busiest part of the auction season. And the 2 women I hired on my team were almost 10 years younger than me at that point and had very little experience. He knew, as well as I knew, that he was in a very hard place because there was no one to do my job at that point. And he stuttered and he said the words that I never thought he would say, but will never forget that he said, was, "What will it take to make you stay?" Which is such a validating thing to hear. But again, we should never have gotten to that point. So the end of the day was back and forth negotiation about the title, about every single thing that I wanted that I ended up getting as a result of that conversation. It taught me for the rest of my life to ask for more than I thought I was going to get, ask for more than I necessarily thought that they were going to give me, because you never know what they have the ability to give. And you also never know how much it's going to make you feel great when you get compensated in the way that you deserve. My entire relationship on that day shifted with my company because I no longer felt like I was being taken advantage of. I felt like I was a valued member of the team because they were paying me what I deserved. That, for me, was such an incredible moment, and one that I have tried to recreate over the course of my career as many times as possible. My old boss, I remember years ago, I went into a performance review and he just started laughing. He's like, I know what you're about to say. And I was like, I know, of course you know what I'm going to say. We need to talk about compensation. It was always something that I brought up. And whether or not I got it, I knew I had asked for it. And that was always a feeling that left me feeling very empowered.
I like your last statement especially very much, because I've struggled with it the first few times. I did not negotiate, but it's something that I intentionally, consciously think about when I'm having conversations. One of the promotions I got, I didn't ask. And when my colleagues asked me, did you negotiate? And I didn't even realize I had to. It was embarrassing, right? You're berating yourself. And the next time I thought about it, and it's a good conversation to have. Whether you get compensation or not, I think it's more empowering for yourself to feel that you've asked, that you've not left something on the table, and that they have considered and they're compensating you correctly. You can do your market research, you can do everything else. And you're very right, not putting your cards on the table and saying, I'm going to quit or not, but really being able to have that regular dialogue with your peers and others so that you can find out whether you're compensated. We all come to work. Yes, we enjoy the job, but we also want to feel like we are treated with respect and we have the ability to look out for our family's futures and everything else.
Absolutely. And I had a friend who told me a story. She worked at a tech company, one of the biggest tech companies in the world, and it was very early on in starting it and was fundamental in building it. And years later, she told me that after the first year, when it was clear that it was going to be a success, they were given a raise and everybody else went in and asked for equity in the company because she worked with all guys. She was the only woman. And she said it was, as you just said, she had no idea that it was even an option. And all the guys had the conversation and they all decided that they were going to go in together. And she was just not part of that conversation. And to this day, she will say that is the difference between her never having to work again, like all of them, and still being at a corporation and working. And that was a conversation that took place in her first year. You think about how many times, and I always think about over that decade, if I had been able to get those raises time after time, how different my base would have looked. And we all know about compound interest and the importance of money building over time. So if you don't know what that is, look it up, because it's one of the most important financial lessons that you will ever learn, that if you have money and you start saving when you're 21 versus when you're 31, that's going to make a huge difference. And I think that was really something that when I thought back on it was very disappointing for me. When you ask about the gamut of emotions, I was disappointed in myself for not having educated myself. And we didn't have Instagram and I didn't have amazing young women telling me to do these things the way that people who are in Gen Z and millennials do now. But I do think that it is something that if you really take control of your future, your financial future, and also make yourself the architect of your own career, you are going to feel so great by the time you get further along in your career that you took the steps at an early stage that will pay off in the long run.
Very true. Time is your friend here. And I heard someone say this, when you negotiate, you almost have to make them, if they don't have any emotion, when you're saying this is what I want, you're obviously asking for too little.
Yeah. One of the case studies in the book, one of the women who wrote that she said, make them wince. If you haven't made them wince, you haven't asked for enough, which I always thought was great.
Very true. And I heard a friend whose colleague did the same thing. He said, ask for this crazy number that you think is way out of this world. And that's what he actually got. He thought they were going to negotiate him down, but they just didn't. When you're talking about a lot of your journey's been about confidence and owning your power, owning the stage. So what advice do you have for early and mid-career women? You already talked about negotiating and talking about your financial outlook, but what can they do to negotiate themselves and build their career towards leadership roles?
Make yourself known. We're in a world right now, in many cases, either hybrid or some work from home office situation. I think that you don't understand how important it is to have a little FaceTime at some point over the course of your career. So to the extent that you have the option to spend time with senior executives in your company, make yourself known. I know that the people who I even met briefly during COVID, I would go into the office here and there. there were a couple of interns, for instance, whose names are emblazoned in my mind versus people I worked with for an entire year because I met them for a day or two over the course of that time. And it is really a valuable thing to establish those relationships. So take advantage of that if you have the opportunity. And I know it's such an interesting world, especially for someone who worked in a corporate office for over 2 decades to watch. But I can tell you some of the most valuable relationships that I have to this day are people who I met early on in my career in the office, long hours spending time together. So definitely try to do that if that's possible. And if not, but you work in a place where you're all on Zoom, but perhaps in the same city, try to make those connections outside of work. Ask someone for some time making coffee. Organize a drinks or a walk or day of community service with other members of your team and really try to spend time creating those bonds. So that would be the first thing that I would say. I said this in the last part too. Be the architect of your own career, especially with everything going on in the world right now. Don't expect other people to be mapping out your career. Think about what you want to do. And if there's something that you're doing your 9-to-5 job or whatever your hours are, and you hear of another part of your industry that's interesting, or you think that something else might actually be a better fit, reach out to people and spend 15 minutes on a phone call asking what they do. Get other people invested in your career journey. But don't expect an HR team to map out your career because, frankly, in my opinion, that rarely happens in the way that you want it to. I find that the people who are the most successful are the people who are doing what they're supposed to be doing in their job, but always looking for other opportunities to grow and evolve. Action leads to action. So if you want something to happen, you need to take action to make it happen.
Very true. And also looking for stretch roles or projects or some way to engage, either in the office or even, I think of a great place to do it, if that's not the forum or you're thinking of changing, is to look at professional organizations, look for leadership roles, because you expand your network instantaneously to this huge community. Or like you said, nonprofits, I think you were talking about before. Just volunteering what speaks to you, because that way you build a community around you, you help, and you're investing your time into something that's really good. And also connecting with people from different walks of life that are not usually part of your normal foray of people you run.
Yeah, and in my case, in many ways, as I said earlier in this conversation, I had my day job at Christie's, but my day job at Christie's was something I had done basically for over a decade. And I wrote my first book, and out of the book came all of these speaking gigs. And then during COVID, I was doing master classes on Instagram, and then the master classes turned into coaching, and then I turned into me writing a second book. And all of these things that I was passionate about were fueling me in a different way than the job that I had loved to do for so long was fueling me. And there were so many moments over the course of the past couple of years, especially during COVID, where I would sit with my husband and say, is it time to leave? Is it time for me to try something on my own? Never really having the courage to do it. But I think that's the dream of an entrepreneur. You have your day job, which you're doing, and you can do it well, but you find something on the side that builds, sustains your soul. And over time, you grow that to the place where you can walk out of the door and do that full time. And I speak as a case study of one, but it certainly is an incredibly fulfilling life to be working for myself now. And I have 3 children who are 5, 7, and 9. And they got really used to having me around during COVID. And I got used to really being around them in a way that I hadn't been able to because I was traveling all the time for work and for auctions. And really my auctions are always at night, which means that I can be with the kids after school and during the days during the summer. And I leave my apartment in the city between 7:30 and 8 at night as they're getting into bed, kiss them, and off I go. And so it's a very different way to work, but it certainly works for our family. So it's been fun.
That's exciting to see, because you've slowly transitioned from, like you said, being a corporate exec to moving that needle and owning your career the way you wanted it. I'm sure not only in your professional relationship, when you already talk about building that FaceTime, was networking is key. I think you said your dad says
network with dad.
Yes, and very important. You're constantly building connections. So how do you network? What do you think of when you think of networking? I know the word sometimes intimidates people on what they should do. And I also recollect that you have sort of this intimate breakfast club with some close friends that you've built this diverse network. So can you walk through what people can do to build those networks, some suggestions, something that makes it easy so people are not feeling the fear of networking? And sometimes, to be frank, it's also they feel like the icky factor of, oh, am I asking for something? But it's really not about asking for something. It's about building an emotional connection.
Exactly. And that's the key. You've been networking with people since you were born. I say this in the book. You've been networking with people since the day you were born, because every single person that you meet over the course of your life becomes part of your network. The question is how you choose to activate that network and what you do to cultivate that network. My first piece of advice when it comes to networking is say yes to every opportunity. So never go to an event and stand in a corner and talk to one person. Never receive an invitation for something and say no. You don't want to burn yourself out. But if you are in a place where there's an opportunity to meet more people, push yourself out of your comfort zone and go. My father used to say that he loves nothing more than walking into a cocktail party where he doesn't know anyone. And when I first started taking auctions, that was often the case with me, because I'm walking into a room of 300 people and my only role there is to go on stage and everybody else there knows one another. And I would stand by the bar, and when people were getting drinks, I would strike up a conversation with them just so that I had someone to talk to. And then I would stay with them until they introduced me to someone, and then I might stay with that person. And it was a little bit of like a cling factor. But now I walk into events, and in many cases, I know half of the people in the room by the end of the event, either because I've been on stage or because I've been just chatting with people the whole time. And those people become part of my network. And that's really what networking is about. You can network with people in Starbucks. You can network with people on an airplane. Anyone, anywhere in the world can be part of your network. But if you want to be very strategic about it in terms of your business, find groups and organizations of people who are like-minded. So we were talking a little bit about nonprofits. A great way to meet people is to volunteer, to join a friends group or a board of a nonprofit so that you have the opportunity to meet people who have a belief or something that is also connecting to something that you care about. And when you move to a new city, there are plenty of opportunities if you exercise to go as a running club or a climbing club or a biking club. Just don't sit at home and think to yourself, like, why have I never met anyone? How can I meet more people? Because there are ample opportunities to do it. You just have to push yourself out of your comfort zone to do it. And in a corporate sense, as I said earlier, ask for 15 minutes of someone's time. Look, we don't know each other and you reached out to me. That's why I'm on your podcast, right? You never, ever know who will say yes to an invitation. And it takes nothing to send an email asking for 15 minutes of someone's time. And frankly, on the other side of that, if you don't have time to do it, you don't have to do it. No harm, no foul. But at least answer the person and tell them that you won't be able to do this because of whatever reason or no reason at all. But the bottom line is the easiest way to network is just to start and to reach out and keep doing it and keep going back to those people so that they know what you're doing and what you're up to. If you've reached out to someone to ask if they could be connected or you could connect them to someone, reach out and let them know if those connections yielded anything or not. If you have any time in your job where you're making a transition, that's a great time to reach out to your network to let them know what's going on, that you're moving into a new career or a new role. And also to just ask them if there's anything that you can do for them in that role. Because people love to be helpful, but they also love it when people offer help. So don't forget to do both. Don't always just network by asking, network and give as well.
Yes, very true. Especially, I think of even mentor and mentee relationships, right? You have to end by asking what you can help with or how you can enable that. Because there's always something that you bring, even if you think, oh, I'm new to this career, or I'm new there, maybe about social media, maybe about something that they have no idea. Or you can even give them feedback or inputs on.
Yeah, actually, a friend of mine is a mentor. She said that at the end, her mentee asked her, is there anything you could do? And she said, I'd love to know how to make a reel on Instagram. And the girl was 23 and she showed her how to do it. And my friend said, it really was not that difficult. I just didn't really have the time or have the energy to learn how to do it. She gave me a little advice and I gave her an hour of my time and it all worked out really well.
Now with social media and other things, the opportunity to learn and the generational difference is quite significant, that there's always more things that you can take away. When you're talking about corporations and setting up time, almost all corporations have open door policies. So I urge people to actually send a calendar invite for 15 minutes because with 10,000 emails, they get pushed to the side. I've not had anyone really reject and say not able to do it. They may reschedule. But if you prepare for it, think of what questions you want to ask. You've done some research, either about their organization, about themselves, and have some key questions you'd like to ask. Even if you're trying to learn something, it builds a sense of achievement, and you're basically respecting their time so that you're prepared for it. And then you ask them the questions. Very often there are two questions I end up the conversation with, depending on how it goes, is who else they suggest I talk to, because that builds you to the next person, the next network. and if they can do an introduction, especially if it's someone in a significantly leadership role. And the second thing is if there's anything you can help with. And sometimes they ask perspectives on where you're working or what you're doing. And you've been able to probably give ideas that they can incorporate into their organization. So there's so many ways that this balance that you may think of as an imbalance of power is really not an imbalance, but how you can balance it. Moving forward, you have 3 kids, your career's transitioned quite a bit. How do you think of work-life balance? To me, it actually is a myth. It doesn't exist because it's a constant transition in my mind. I was just wondering how you manage, how you've evolved over time, and what works for you and what doesn't, and how do you continue to re-strategize?
It's so funny because I wrote an entire chapter in my second book, the one that's coming out in March of next year, about the myth of the work-life balance, because I agree that it does not exist. And I think as a society, we have to really start thinking about how we stop expecting for there to be a balance. I always say that if you think about the word balance itself, I mean, think about balancing on a balance beam. These things are not easy to do. Balance is not something that comes naturally, 2 scales that are perfectly lined up. And I think the reality is in most cases, many of us are either in a place where one is higher than the other, or in some cases, one is slamming to the ground while the other is sky high, realistically, especially when you're adding kids into the mix and trying to juggle work and all of the different things that looks like. And it's interesting because I don't think that there's anything wrong with that's life. It's okay that there are times when one thing, the work side is slamming to the ground and life is sky high. And there are times when life is slamming to the ground and work is sky high. I think we have to give ourselves the grace to be okay with that and understand that there are going to be times when it's like that. That's not ideal, but what we should be trying to do is find something a little bit off center that makes us feel good. And as long as we feel good with where our life is, then it's fine. Because the bottom line is not everybody has the same idea of balance. I have some friends who really love it when they're crazy busy at work and it's just go, and they don't want it to be in a place where everything's balanced. That's just the way that they are driven. The same with times I have friends who want to spend 24/7 with their children, and that's all they want to do. They have no interest in a corporate job or any kind of work. And that's fine too, because that's what their work-life balance looks like. So I think we have to say farewell to that myth. Personally, as I said, not being in a full-time role anymore at a company has been a real change for me because I am used to being insanely busy to the point of everything gets juggled into a calendar that has 90 different sticky tabs and my days just fly by. But I've had to really say to myself, just be present and be okay with that. You're not missing anything right now. This is the way that your life is going to look moving forward. And there will be times as I walk into the fall where my auction calendar, every night there will be an auction and I will be on planes a lot for 3 months. And I know that September, October, November, very busy. Slows down again in December, starts up again in January. Summer has been very slow. I often say to my children, there are times when there are sprints and there are times when it's calm. And when I'm in sprint mode, I need to give myself grace, and I need as a family for us all to understand that this is going to be a time when I'm going to be hard charging. And then when things slow down, that's when we are full on family time. So I think it's just really being honest with yourself about what that looks like and what makes you happy. And if it makes you happy, then stick with it. And if it doesn't, then make changes to get yourself to a place where you feel like you're living the life you want to live.
And making sure you make some time for yourself in all of this.
The other thing about making time for yourself, and I interviewed Allie Love during Instagram, who's a Peloton instructor, and she said something that I've never forgotten, because I said to her, is there a moment for you? You're on this bike inspiring 250,000 people to live their best life, and you're just go all the time. What do you do to fill up and take a rest? And she said, some people need to go to a spa and enjoy a cup of tea to relax. She's like, that's not who I am. I am filled up and energized by being around people and by motivating other people. And there was something for me that was so freeing in hearing her say that, because that's how I am. I don't want to go sit in a hotel room by myself. That makes me sad and lonely. I want to, if I'm traveling to a city, stay with a friend in their house and be surrounded by the chaos and make plans with every single person I know in that city while I'm there to take an auction, because that fills me up. And I think we also have to know ourselves to know what that is and what that looks like for each of us. And once we realize that, we can structure our lives in that.
We all feed off different energies in different phases of our life and different times of the day. Probably going to an auction just energizes you and lights you up from the inside, I'm sure, just the energy from the crowd. You can be an introvert, you can be an extrovert, or as they call it, ambivert. And different times. Like during COVID for me, there were times that being isolated was okay. But when I saw people, it was just as energizing to see them. But balancing those two pieces together and figure out what works for you. So you have had a corporate career for 22 years. Obviously, you're going through a huge transition, finding your own entrepreneurial spirit, building your own business. What advice would you give your 21-year-old self? You've obviously given a ton through this whole conversation, but what would be like some key things that you'd say, here is one thing I would give my 21-year-old self as I look through into the future?
I think I would say to my 21-year-old self, like, it's all going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's going to work out. Or you have what it takes to get through the hard times. You have what it takes to push through the really good times and enjoy them. And don't lose that. Don't ever think that you need anything more than yourself to get through anything in life. And my family was in a car accident on Halloween of this past year. My 3 children, my husband and I fractured my spine. I broke 7 ribs and was in the hospital for 9 days. My children were all in the hospital. My husband was in the hospital. And it was an incredibly difficult time to be not only in so much pain myself, but also trying to help my family recover from such a traumatic time. And I think back to what I've gone through over the course of my life, nothing even remarkably like that. Nothing was even close to what I went through, but everything prepared me for that. I never had a doubt from the moment that we were hit to the moment that I got to the hospital and had the first surgery and then the second surgery and the subsequent follow-up from all of that. There was never a time during that period where I didn't think, you're going to be okay. Like, you've got this, you're strong enough. And I realized that all of the things that have prepared me for that have happened really in my adult life, to be ready for something like that to happen and to be strong enough to not only get through it myself, but also help my family get through that. So I think I would say to my 21-year-old self, like, you got this. Just trust yourself. Believe that you are strong enough to do whatever you want to do and build the life you want. And I would say that to everyone else out there, whether or not you are strong enough. And there are going to be challenging times, there are going to be difficult times, but we all are strong enough to do it. So hang in there, live through the hard times, even the rock bottoms. You're going to be able to pick yourself up and keep going. Sometimes it's minute by minute, sometimes it's day by day, but you got this.
I'm glad you're all doing well, and I think the spirit and the confidence in ourselves, because we will figure out, right? It's resilience to come back.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So in all of this, as you've changed over time, what is the one word you would use to describe yourself?
Resilient. and I know it more than ever now.
Very true. And I think it's probably come into stark contrast in the last year, right? As you look back and having to go through the accident and just deal with everything that's come through. So I'm glad to hear everyone's doing well. So Lydia, thank you. This has been a great conversation. You've touched upon how networking, how we can build our own voice, how we can own the stage. You use the gavel technique, but how we can own our presence, our brand, how we engage with people. FaceTime is critical, building that connection with people and figuring out the art of storytelling to really convey our message so it sticks with people. There's so many things that you touched upon. And for everyone who's listening, there are things that you can take away from humor, from the way you convey your presence, that will enable not just your career growth, but really help build those relationships. And as you direct your career in whichever path you choose to do, there are so many things that you constantly build on, and wishing everyone all the best. And congratulations. I know you have your new book, Claiming Your Confidence, coming out next year. I really look forward to reading that. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Tune in every other Wednesday to catch the next episode. If you think a friend may benefit from this, please share this podcast with them. Please like, subscribe, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. I would love to hear from you about your stories and your journey. You can reach me on email at Women, Career and Life. Until next time, this is Sirisha signing off. Remember, there are infinite possibilities to drive change in career and life. Which will you choose to make a reality today?